Welcome to the Sagebrush Trail, stories of the West, from the frontier to the Yukon. I'm Adele, reading Delilah of the Snows by Harold Benloss. Chapter 12, The Major's Bear. Darkness had closed down on the hillside, and supper was over when Ingleby and Ledger lounged on a cedar log outside the shanty. Hetty lay close by in the deer-hide chair, and Tomlinson had stretched his long limbs just clear of the fire. He lay placidly smoking, with no more than an occasional deferential glance at Hetty. Now and then the flickering firelight touched his face and showed the harsh lines of its rugged chiseling and the steadiness of his contemplative eyes. Tomlinson, it was generally admitted, could do more with an axe and shovel than most of the men in that valley, but a certain deliberateness of speech and gesture characterized him in repose. He was a man who worked the harder when it was necessary, because he seldom wasted an effort. It was slowly he raised his head and glanced at Hetty. "The boys can get away with another 20 loaves this week," he said. "Jake figured you'd have 7 or 8 more of them from the gully workings coming in. They told him they'd no use for flapjacks or grindstones when they could get bread like that." "Very well," said Hetty. "I'll have an extra batch ready on Saturday." She cast a little quick glance at Ingleby, for it was gratifying that he should have this testimony to the quality of her bakery. Though it was scarcely necessary, the venture had, in fact, been a success from the commencement. And though Hetty's flour was rapidly running out, she found it just as profitable to bake what the miners brought her at a tariff, which in few other regions would have been thought strictly moderate. She was also as popular as her bread, for she turned nobody away, though there were men in that valley with neither money nor provisions left, who had failed to find even the color of gold. Her boys, she said, would strike it rich some day, and one must risk a little now and then. But it is not given to many women to win the faith and homage accorded her by most of them in return for a handful of flour. Tomlinson, however, had not delivered all his message yet. "I ran up against Wolverine Gordon yesterday," he said. "He wants more salt in his bread. Says that sweet dough's ruining his digestion, and if you can't fix it to suit him, he'll do his own baking. I guess I'd let the old instinct have his salt by the handful." Hetty laughed good-humoredly. "I must try to please him." Tomlinson watched her with grave, reflective eyes. "Gordon was most glad to eat cedar bark not long ago," he said. "Did you ever get $1 out of him?" "That," said Hetty quietly, "is not your business, Mr. Tomlinson." The long-limbed miner apparently ruminated over this. "Well," he said, "I guess it isn't, but you just let me know when you want any debts collected. I figure I could be quite smart at it." "They do it with a gun in your country?" asked Ledger. Tomlinson held up a hard and distinctly large-sized hand. "No, sir. If I ever get that on one of the fakers who sling ink at us, I guess I'll make my little protest." There was silence for a minute or two, and during it the beat of hoofs came out of the valley. They drew nearer, and Tomlinson laughed softly as he glanced at the listeners' faces. "Haul Sewell. He's coming back," he said. "Mr. Sewell is across the divide, ever so far away," said Hetty. "Well," said the big prospector, "that cayuse of his is coming up the trail most too played out to put its feet down. It was 5 minutes later when Sewell appeared leading the horse, which was in almost as sorry a case as he was. His jean garments hung about him, torn to rags, and his face was gaunt and drawn with weariness and hunger. He stood still, smiling at them in the uncertain light of the fire. "I've come back, warned off by the police as usual," he said. "In the language of the country, nobody seems to have any use for me." The naive admission appealed to Hetty as much as the signs of privation, which were plain upon him, did, and stirred her more than any account of a successful mission would have done. Sewell was perhaps aware of this, for he had the gift of pleasing women. "Well," she said, "where else would you come to? Whenever you want it, there's room here for you. Walter, take his horse, and then spread his blankets out near the fire. Tom, you'll get another trout and fill the kettle." They did her bidding, though Ingleby wondered a little as he set about it, for Hetty had astonished him somewhat frequently of late. He had long regarded her as a girl devoid of intellectuality, to be petted with brotherly kindness and taken care of in case of necessity, and it had never occurred to him until he came to Canada that there was any depth of character in Hetty Ledger. It was, in fact, almost disconcerting to find that she had changed into a capable woman who had by her enterprise alone enabled him and her brother to hold on to their claim. She was virtually mistress now, as the command she had given him indicated, but while it afforded him a gratification he did not quite understand to do her bidding, it was a trifle difficult to accustom himself to the position. In the meanwhile, Tomlinson, who chafed inwardly because no commands had been laid on him, lay with respectful admiration watching her prepare Sewell's supper. When it was ready, Sewell made an excellent meal and then stretched himself out wearily on a pile of branches near the fire. The red light flickered uncertainly upon the towering trunks behind him, and now and then fell upon the long-limbed Tomlinson lying in the shadow, and Hetty sitting in her deer hide chair, with Ingleby and Ledger stretched close at her feet. It never occurred to her that there was anything anomalous in this. They were, in the phraseology of the country, her boys, and though Hetty Ledger was far from clever, she had the comprehension that comes of sympathy, and she understood and ruled them as a woman with greater intellect probably could not have done. The night was cool and still, and the hoarse murmur of the river came up in pulsations across the pines. "After a long journey through the bush, this is exceptionally nice, even though it is a little rough on Miss Ledger," said Sewell with a quiet smile. "Her cares are increasing, for another of her boys has come home a trifle the worse for wear tonight. But I scarcely think she minds. It is the women who never do mind that are worth all the rest." Once more Ingleby was astonished and gratified. Sewell was, of course, a speaker by profession, but there was a vibration in his voice which signified that this was more than a passing compliment. Ingleby believed implicitly in Sewell, and the fact that the man he looked up to should regard Hetty as he evidently did had naturally its effect upon him, since it not infrequently needs the appreciation of others to make clear the value of that which lies nearest to one. Hetty, however, as usual, evinced no originality. "When you came in, one would have fancied it was quite a long while since you were a boy," she said. "Now and then I feel it is. Men who lead the life I do grow old rapidly, you see. We are, in fact, nurtured on the storm, but that is really no reason why we shouldn't occasionally like to rest in the sunshine." "It has been dark most an hour," said Tomlinson the practical. Sewell turned and glanced at him reproachfully. It is always sunshine where Hetty Ledger is. Well, said Hetty with a little laugh, you haven't seen me when the dough won't rise, and I don't like idle boys. They get into mischief. What are you going to do? Peg down a claim and earn my living virtuously. I have, you see, tried mining already. I like this end of the valley, and because you have made me one of the family, I fancy I'll put up a shanty here. That brings on the question of provisions, and when I was clambering down the range, I came upon 2 or 3 black-tailed deer. I'm going back to get one as soon as the stiffness is worn off me. Will you or Ledger come with me, Ingleby? Walter will go, said Hetty. Ingleby turned towards her slowly, and she noticed the jaded look in his face, which was a trifle hollow as well as bronzed. He had toiled with a fierce, feverish impatience for long weeks at 2 profitless claims, and mind and body felt the strain. Still he remembered that it was some time since he had contributed anything to the common fund. I've ever so much on hand, he said. Send Tom. Hetty made a little authoritative gesture. Tom couldn't hit a deer to save his life, and my boys are expected to do what they're told. You will take him, Mr. Sewell, and if you let him come back to the claim in less than a week, I'll be vexed with you. Ingleby, who knew that Hetty could be persistent, permitted Sewell to arrange the expedition, and when the latter retired shortly afterwards, Tomlinson, who had said very little, looked up. You like that man? He asked. Of course, said Hetty. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have had him here. Tomlinson said nothing further, but Hetty laughed when he glanced inquiringly at Ingleby. You needn't ask Walter. There are 2 people he believes in before anybody else, and Mr. Sewell's one of them. And I guess I know who the other is, said Tomlinson, who was a trifle tactless now and then. Hetty looked at him instead of at Ingleby. No, she said reflectively, I don't think you do. It doesn't matter who she is anyway, and you haven't told me what you think of Mr. Sewell. Tomlinson, who watched her with steady eyes, sat silent a moment as though ruminating over something he could not quite understand. Then he said, The man has grit. Still, I haven't much use for his notion of going around trailing out trouble. It isn't difficult to find it, said Ingleby. Well, said Tomlinson, I'm not going to light out when it comes along my way, but I guess I'll wait till it does, like a sensible man. And just now, I have no use for any. Our folks in Oregon are poor, and if my luck holds out, there's an old woman who's had about as much trouble as she can bear, going to have an easy time the rest of her life. He stopped a moment and rose leisurely to his feet. Well, I'll go along now. I guess Sewell means well. Good night. He turned away, and when he lumbered into the shadow of the pines, Ledger smiled at Ingleby. It seems to me that Tomlinson's recommendation didn't go very far, he said. Ingleby laughed a trifle scornfully. Did you expect anything else when a man who could have made himself almost anything he wished gives himself up to a life of privation for the good of his fellows? It's a little gained when men of Tomlinson's description are willing to admit that he probably has good intentions. He retired to sleep shortly afterwards, for he and Ledger commenced their labors at sunrise every day. A week later, towards dusk one evening, he and Sewell stopped near the edge of a deep ravine, some distance from their camp in the ranges. The torrent which had worn it out moaned far down in the shadow below, and the somber firs rolled up to the edge of it, 200 yards away. Thickets of tall fern and salmonberry hung over the brink, and for a score of yards or so, a slope of soil and gravel, sprinkled with tufts of juniper and dwarf firs, ran down steeper than a roof, Then it broke off abruptly, and from where they stood Ingleby could not see the bottom of the gulf beneath, though he knew that the depth of such canyons is often several hundred feet. They had left their camp that morning, and one small black-tailed deer which Sewell had shot was all they had to show for a day of strenuous labor. "No way of getting across there," said Sewell as he flung himself down at the foot of a cedar. "It's a little unfortunate, too, because from what Tomlinson said, it's a good bear country on the opposite side. One deer won't last very long, even if we can manage to dry it, and there are parts of the black bear that are a good deal nicer than you might suppose." "Have you ever tried them?" asked Ingleby. Sewell laughed. "I have. In fact, I lived on black bear for rather longer than I cared about when I was up in the ranges once before. It's not unlike pork. I mean the kind the Canadian usually keeps for home consumption." That a man who could probably get nothing else should have lived on bear meat is, of course, not necessarily any great recommendation. But the fact tended to increase Ingleby's respect for his companion. There was, it seemed, very little that Sewell had not done or borne for the cause of the democracy, and Ingleby had already endued him with the qualities of Garibaldi. Other men, older and shrewder than he was, are, however, occasionally addicted to idealization, and Sewell could certainly ride and shoot as well as he could rouse the hopes and passions of the multitude, which was a good deal. Ingleby, who could do neither, had the Englishman's appreciation of physical capability, and it had once or twice been a grief to him to discover that other exponents of the opinion Sewell held were flabby, soft-fleshed men whose appearance warranted the belief that the adoption of the simple, laborious life they lauded would probably make an end of them. The hard and wiry Sewell, who while he preached his gospel earned his bread by bodily toil, a man of comely presence and finished courtesy, Spartanly temperate in everything but speech, with unquestioned physical as well as moral courage, approached, in his opinion, the Paulinian ideal. It was, however, seldom that he permitted it to become apparent, for Ingleby, like most men who shape their lives by them, kept his deeper thoughts to himself, and on that occasion he complained about a boot which had split in an untimely fashion at a seam, until Sewell looked up. "Do you hear anything?" he asked. Ingleby, who had not lived very long in the bush, naturally heard nothing, until the sudden crash of a rifle was flung back by the hillside. Then there was a sharp smashing of the undergrowth, and it was plain to him that a beast of some description was traveling through the bush. "A bear!" exclaimed Sewell. "The small black kind go straight at everything which lies between them and their covert. I fancy that one's partly crippled, too. It's your shot. If he breaks cover, you might stop him for the man he belongs to." Ingleby took up the rifle he was not greatly accustomed to, and waited crouching with his eyes on the forest, and one foot drawn under him, while the snapping and crackling grew nearer until a shambling form lurched out of a thicket. Then, while the foresight, which he could not keep still, wobbled all over it, he pressed the trigger, or at least attempted to do so, as the miner to whom the rifle belonged had instructed him. He felt the butt jar his shoulder, and the smoke blew in his eyes, while a man burst out of the undergrowth. There was no sign of the bear, and Ingleby fancied it had plunged over the edge of the ravine. The man was red in face and gasped as he brandished his rifle in their direction. "Who the devil are you trying to shoot?" he said. He did not stop, however, and Sewell, who recognized him as Major Coulthurst, sprang to his feet and sent a warning shout after him. "Hold on, sir! There's a big gully right in front of you," he said. The major did not seem to hear him, and next moment there was a crash as he floundered through a thicket. Then he disappeared suddenly, and Ingleby felt a little shiver run through him as he heard a suggestive rattle of stones. "Gone over," he said hoarsely. Still, the top part's not quite so horribly steep." They made for the spot at a floundering run, for it is a trifle difficult to travel fast in the bush, and came gasping to a rent in the undergrowth on the edge of the gully. Ingleby set his lips as he looked down. The major, who looked up at them with fear in his eyes, lay full length on the steepest part of the slope beneath, with both hands clenched upon a little bush of juniper. 2 or 3 yards beneath him lay a shadowy gulf, and the dull roar of water that came up suggested its depth. "I think this thing is coming out," he said. Ingleby saw a diminutive fir close to the man, and 2 more between himself and the edge of the canyon, for in that country the firs will grow on anything short of an upright wall, and the next moment he swung himself over the edge. However, he did it cautiously, taking care to drive his feet well into the gravel, and finally contrived to slide down to the nearest tree. Sewell was evidently coming down behind him, for the stones went rattling by and struck the upturned face beneath. It was flushed and distorted with swollen veins on the forehead, for the man was evidently feeling the strain. "Can you hold on for a minute or two, sir?" Ingleby asked. "I might manage one, not more," was the hoarse answer. "That should do," said Ingleby reassuringly, and letting himself go again, clutched at the tree close above the brink of the declivity. He also grasped Sewell, who was coming down backwards amidst a shower of stones, and when he arrived safe, lay full length with his comrade's hand upon his waist and one arm stretched out. Nor did he stop to consider whether he could get back to the tree again when the major clutched his hand. "Hold fast, and we'll pull you up," he said. Next moment a strenuous grip closed upon his hand, and he felt his arm being drawn out of its socket as he strove to bend his back. Coulthurst was horribly heavy and apparently incapable of rendering him any assistance. Indeed, for a moment or two he was far from sure that they would not slide down into the shadowy gorge together. He could see the major's suffused face and hear Sewell gasping behind him. Then Coulthurst, apparently by a supreme effort, raised himself a trifle, and he was a foot or 2 nearer the fir when he lay prone again. Ingleby fancied he could feel his sinews cracking, and knew they would not endure that tension long. "Reach your left hand back," said Sewell hoarsely. Ingleby did so and felt the bark of the slender tree, while Sewell leaned out recklessly over him and clutched Coulthurst's shoulder. Then for a few seconds they made a very grim effort, until the major got 1 foot under him and seized the tree. After that there was no great difficulty, and when they dragged him out of peril, he lay still, gasping for almost a minute. Then he raised himself so that he could sit. "I think my rifle went over," he said. "Where's the bear?" Sewell's eyes twinkled and Ingleby laughed, as did the major. "Of course," he said. "Very much obliged, I'm sure. I mean it, but where is the bear?" Personal peril was not exactly a new thing to the major, who was also a man of fixed ideas, but he made a little comprehensive gesture when Sewell glanced significantly at the edge of the precipice. "I don't know, sir, and really don't think an attempt to find out would be advisable," he said. As a matter of fact, they never did discover what became of the bear, but in the meanwhile nobody said anything further for a moment or two. Then the major rubbed his leg. "We couldn't very well stay here all night, and I've hurt my knee," he said. Ingleby glanced at the almost precipitous descent. "I'm afraid we couldn't get you up without a rope." "I'm quite satisfied that you couldn't, and don't propose to let you try," said the major. There are, however, the pack-horse lariats at my camp, and it can't be more than 2 miles away. I have a police trooper there. One of you could get up?" Ingleby fancied that it was within his powers. "I'll try, sir, if only it's because I believe I came very near shooting you," he said. Coulthurst laughed. "You were within an ace of it." Ingleby said nothing further, but crawled very cautiously up the slope. Join me next week on the Sagebrush Trail for more Western adventure in Delilah of the Snows by Harold Binloss.